Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us again for this budget hearing. At last year's budget hearing, I noted that we were facing the worst unlawful migration crisis in our country in 2 decades. And this chart that's about to come up will show you that not only was it the worst in 2 decades last year during the hearing, but since then, it's gotten even worse. As you know, in your recently released border plan, you suggested it can get worse yet by removing Title 42. Here's your quote. You noted in your border plan that, quote, when the Title 42 public health order is lifted, we anticipate migration levels will increase as smugglers will seek to take advantage of and profit from vulnerable migrants, end quote. You further noted that, quote, a significant increase in migrant encounters will substantially strain our system even farther, end quote. I couldn't agree with you more. A record 1 million people who came to the southern border illegally were permitted into the United States last year, even with roughly 50% of those who came to the border unlawfully having been turned away under Title 42. It is clear to all that losing Title 42 will turn this border crisis into a catastrophe. As the Border Patrol has told us, they believe they will lose all operational control of the border. There is no plan to substitute for Title 42. As an example, there's no plan to fix an asylum system that everyone agrees is broken. I think you have said that in the past publicly. There's no plan to replace the tools that were in place during the last administration to help address the border crisis, including a robust Remain in Mexico policy and increased detention of questionable asylum seekers. Instead, as I read it, your proposed plan primarily provides more resources to move people through the system and to do so more quickly and efficiently, in effect to make it easier for people to get from the border to the interior of the country. Unfortunately, decisions to de-emphasize internal enforcement, plus your funding requests shift away from detention for removals and detention capacity, and the new asylum rules proposed by the administration do nothing to actually deter unlawful migration. Quite the opposite, and the smugglers know it. This year, we also saw stark reminders of the threat that terrorism poses to communities across the country, and that more than 2 decades after 9/11, our borders can still be breached by those who mean to do us harm. In this regard, I am concerned that policies and safeguards with one of our closest counterterrorism partners in the world, the United Kingdom, didn't prevent a dangerous man who simply lied on his online application in the DHS visa waiver program from making his way into our country to a small town in Texas, Colleyville. Thankfully, none of the synagogue members he took hostage were harmed, but that easily could not have been the case. We were recently shocked when we were informed that 42 people who have come to our southern border unlawfully and been encountered by the Border Patrol are on a terrorist watch list. Additionally, a recent report from the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General highlighted the potential of other foreign threats. The IG found that in the chaotic evacuation of over 76,000 Afghans, DHS failed to screen the evacuees using DoD's tactical information collected from the most dangerous terrorists. The result? DoD's after-the-fact analysis indicated there are at least 50 Afghan evacuees with, quote, potentially serious security concerns who were released into the United States. Of course, there's also an assault on our borders by criminal drug trafficking organizations. This is not new, but it's gotten worse. With the shift of fentanyl production from China to Mexico, the flow of these dangerous narcotics across our border have profound consequences. According to the Customs and Border Protection statistics, fentanyl seizures at the southern border increased 56% in March compared to March 2021, a year ago, and over 300% increase from March 2020. These numbers don't actually tell us how much is actually flooding into our communities. In fact, the Border Patrol tells us that they believe the vast majority of drugs are not being apprehended. But in my home state of Ohio and around the country, these drugs are coming in and resulting in broken families, damaged communities, and the loss of lives through overdoses on a massive scale. We are also facing constant cyber attacks to our vulnerable critical infrastructure and federal networks. I'm concerned that due to our support of Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion, our just support of Ukraine, we are at higher risk than ever of a Russian cyber attack. I appreciate your support of the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act that Senator Peters and I co-sponsored, and hope that Department of Homeland Security is working with stakeholders in industry and in government today on complex but critical rulemaking processes needed to put this new law to work to safeguard our nation as soon as possible. As you know from our conversations, I'm concerned by the administration's decision to create this Disinformation Governance Board at DHS. As the author of the bipartisan law that established the Global Engagement Center at the State Department to combat the evolving threat of foreign propaganda and disinformation, I do not believe the government should turn tools used to assist our allies and counter foreign adversaries onto the American people. Our focus should be on bad actors like Russia and China, Iran, North Korea, not our own citizens. Ms. Secretary, you've got a very full agenda at the Department. You've been put in a very difficult position with regard to the border. Thank you once again for being here to answer our questions, but I do want to note that we only today received all your responses to the committee's questions for the record from last year's budget hearing. I would hope that you will commit today to answering all of our questions much more promptly as we discuss these issues today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Secretary Mayorkas, it's the practice of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if you would please